Hi everyone, today's topic is about our eyes. So in this topic we are going to learn about the structure of the eyeball. So here we can see a beautiful image of a cross section of the eyeball, where we know the eye is an organ of vision. It is sphere in shape. We can see it is spherical in shape, and the diameter approximately is around 24 mm, that is 2.4 or 2.5 centimeters, and posterior anterior 1/6 is more convex, which is little more convex, which is formed by the cornea. Basically, the eyeball contains three layers. The outer layer is the fibrous coat, which is shown in white in color here. The middle coat is this light pink color shown, that is called middle vascular coat, which is rich in blood vessels. The inner coat is called as the nervous coat, which contains retina. So the outer fibrous coat, posterior 5/6 is made up of sclera, anterior 1/6 is made up of cornea. Cornea is a transparent sheet, whereas the sclera is opaque membrane and it is very tough. And all the recti muscles inserts into the sclera. Then the middle vascular coat contains the choroid, ciliary body and iris. So middle vascular coat posteriorly contains choroid. Choroid forms the ciliary body and further continues to form a muscle called as iris. And inner nervous coat. Nervous coat again we can divide into nervous and non-nervous part. Nervous part contains the retina. Non-nervous part contains the pigment layer of retina, which continues anteriorly. So let's see little more in detail about these structures. Now let's see few terms associated with the eye. First, we should talk about the visual axis and optic axis. Visual axis is the connection between the anterior pole to the macula lutea. Macula luteum means yellow color. So macula lutea is an yellow color pigmented zone which is present little lateral to the posterior pole of the eye. So the depression of seen in the macula lutea is called fovea centralis. So the visual axis is from the center of the cornea, the middle of the cornea and the middle of the pupil till the fovea centralis. That is visual axis. Optical axis is connecting the anterior pole to the posterior pole. The central of the posterior scleral curvature is called the posterior pole. If we connect these two is called as the posterior pole. Next, about the optic nerve. The optic nerve lies slightly medial to the posterior pole. This is the posterior pole. Optic nerve, where the point where it is getting origin, the optic nerve continuing, it is called as the optic disc, where the optic nerve pierces the sclera, which is called cribriform sclerae, which makes the holes in the sclera, cribriform sclerae, and pierces the sclera to emerge from the eye. So this area is called a blind spot, physiological blind spot, because there are no rods and cones in the optic disc. And equator is divides the eye into anterior half and posterior half, an imaginary line. Meridian line is along the optical axis between the anterior and posterior pole, passing through the anterior and posterior. Let's talk about each layer of the eye. So starting with the outer fibrous layer, which is formed by the sclera and cornea. Sclera, it makes the posterior 5/6 of the eyeball. It makes the posterior 5/6. So this white part is the sclera, which is an opaque layer, and it is covered by a fascia which is called as Tenon's capsule or fascia bulbi, and the space between the sclera and the Tenon's capsule or fascia bulbi is called episcleral space. And the sclera receives the insertion of four recti and the oblique muscles as well, which are the major extraocular muscles except levator palpebrae superioris, which inserts into the upper eyelid. Remaining all extraocular muscles are inserted into the sclera. Next, cornea, which makes the anterior 1/6. It makes the anterior 1/6 of the eyeball and it is transparent. It is transparent because of the uniform arrangement of collagen fibers, and it is avascular layer. The junction between the cornea and sclera is called sclerocorneal junction or limbus, which is also called as sulcus sclerae. The optic nerve, which is emerging, piercing the sclera, which is called cribriform sclerae, it is 3 mm medial to the center or posterior pole. It is 3 mm medial to the posterior pole is the optic nerve, and the point where it is emerging is called optic disc, and it is the physiological blind spot of the eyeball. Next, about the ciliary vessels and nerves, which also pierces the sclera. These are the structures. You can see the ciliary vessels are nerves which are surrounding the optic nerve, and vena comitatus, the veins or verticose veins. These veins almost pierce the middle of the sclera, the junction between the anterior, that is the sclerocorneal junction, and the posterior pole. Somewhere in the middle of the sclera we can see the verticose veins or vena comitatus, which pierce the sclera. So these are the structures piercing the sclera. Further, the inner surface of the sclera is separated from the choroid by perichoroidal space. Perichoroidal space, which contains a thin translucent kind of connective tissue, thin delicate connective tissue, which is called lamina fusca. And the sinus venosus sclera, this is a circular canal which is present at the junction of sclerocorneal junction, and that drains the aqueous humor, which is a fluid present in front of the lens. So this is the lens, we can see this is a cut part of little part of the eye near the sclerocorneal junction. So here is the cornea, this is sclera, this is sclerocorneal junction, and we can see the sinus venosus sclera, which is called as Schlem's canal or canal of Schlem, which is meant to drain the aqueous humor into veins. And we can see the iris dividing the anterior part, that is in front of the eye lens, into anterior chamber in front of the iris. Posterior to the iris is called as the posterior chamber. Both these chambers contains aqueous humor, which is a thin transparent fluid, and internally this sclera, there is sinus venosus or canal of Schlem, it is lined by a thin layer of endothelium. So vascular supply to the cornea. Cornea is a vascular structure. Sclera is also mostly avascular, and nutrition from the aqueous humor. The cornea gains its nutrition from the aqueous humor, and there is no venous drainage, no lymph vessels. But there is nerves, free nerve endings are present, which are called ciliary nerves, and that is the reason the cornea is quite transparent, and allogenic transplantation is possible with cornea even after the death of person. And layers of the cornea, histologically it has got the stratified squamous non-keratinized epithelium, and then a membrane over which the epithelium is resting called Bowman's membrane, then connective tissue stroma which contains collagen fibers called corneal stroma, and deeper we have here posterior limiting membrane which is called Descemet's membrane, and endothelium which is a simple squamous epithelium. So these are the layers of cornea. The vascular coat. Now we are talking about the second layer, vascular coat. Vascular coat contains the choroid. Choroid continues to form ciliary body. Ciliary body further continues to form iris. So vascular contains three parts: choroid, ciliary body and iris. And remember one thing, iris is the only muscle in our body which is derived from the ectoderm. Most of the muscles we see, they are all derived from the mesoderm. So iris is muscle which is derived from the ectoderm. Choroid we can see here, it is highly vascular structure containing fluxes of blood vessels, and present mainly on the posterior 5/6 of the eyeball, posterior 5/6, and it extends making an irregular margin called as ora serrata. From there further it continues to form ciliary body. Ciliary body protrudes to form the iris. So the two surfaces, the outer, it is connected to the sclera by suprachoroidal membrane, and inner attached to the pigment layer of retina. Next, regarding the ciliary body, so what you are seeing here is the muscle present within the ciliary body. Ciliary body contains three parts: ciliary ring, ciliary process, ciliaris muscle. Ciliary ring is marked by the ridges. The peripheral ridges are formed by the ciliary ring, and the ciliary process, you can see the infoldings of the ciliary body is called as the ciliary process. Infoldings of the choroid is called as ciliary process, and which is continuous further with the iris. You can see it is continuous further with the iris and connected to the lens by these thin thread-like structures which are called as suspensory ligament of lens. The action of the ciliary body, it is mainly for accommodation and changing the curvature of lens for near and far vision. So accommodation of muscle for accommodation and change the curvature of lens. So next is the iris. So the iris is like a diaphragm which is guarding the aperture that is called as pupil. So it is a musculovascular contractile diaphragm which is circular thin in the aqueous humor, and it is perforated in the center by a circular aperture called as pupil through which the light enters inside the eye. So the iris contains two types of muscles, that is circularly running muscle called as constrictor pupillae, and dilator pupillae. Radially running muscles are called as dilator pupillae. And one more thing I forgot to tell is the iris is the only muscle which is derived from the ectoderm. Next, the third layer, retina. So the retina, the outer surface is in contact with the choroid, and the inner surface is identified by macula lutea. This is the macula lutea. This is the optic disc through which the nerve fibers, that is the optic nerve fibers, emerge out of the eye, and we can see several blood vessels diverging from the optic disc which are entering inside the eye. So this is a ophthalmoscopic view, fundoscopic view, where we can see the intrinsic arteries and veins of the eye. And the depression within the macula lutea, the center, it is called as fovea centralis. And fovea centralis contains only the rods, and cones receptors are completely absent. Optic disc is the area where the optic nerve is pierced by the sclera, and it is insensitive to light because it does not have any kind of receptors. So it is called physiological blind spot. And blood supply to the retina is mainly by the central artery of retina, which is example of an end artery. It is an example of an end artery. So if there is any thrombosis or block in the central artery of retina, the person goes blind, and it is drained by central vein of retina. So these are the layers of retina. It is a schematic image for us to understand the several layers. So pigment cell layer, then photoreceptor layer containing rods and cones, and then the nuclear layer, the nuclei of rods and cones, cell bodies. Then the plexiform layer, where the nerve fibers from rods and cones, they form plexus or synapsin, that is called outer plexiform layer. Then inner nuclear layer, which contains bipolar cells, some supporting cells, amacrine cells, horizontal cells, amacrine cells, H for horizontal cells, M for Muller cells, they are all B for bipolar cells, they are all present. Then again one more plexiform layer, nerve plexus, which the synapse we can see between this layer to the ganglionic cells, which are the large cells, ganglionic cells. Ganglionic cells, the nerve fibers, they are all continuous to form the optic nerve fiber. Apart from that, we have got outer limiting membrane and inner limiting membrane. So these are the 10 layers of retina. Let's see some applied aspect. Persistent pupillary membrane. Usually the pupil is covered by membrane before birth. Just before birth it ruptures and to form an opening called pupil. Suppose if the pupillary membrane is persistent, what happens? It is it represents the remnants of the anterior tunica vasculosa lentis. It is a remnant of anterior tunica vasculosa lentis, and it appears as strands of connective tissue bridging the pupillary area, and they are usually asymptomatic and of no functional significance, but they object the light which is entering the eye, so the person may not see properly or he may be completely blind if this is not corrected. Next is the coloboma. Coloboma is also a congenital condition. It is an eye condition that the people are born with, and it happens when the part of the tissue that makes up the eye is missing. So part of the tissue of the eye is missing. It can affect one or both the eyes. This is called as coloboma. Abnormal protrusion of the uveal tissue through the weaker point of the eye is called as staphyloma. Staphyloma is abnormal protrusion of uveal tissue from the weaker point of the eye. Cryptophthalmos, a rare developmental anomaly in which the anterior surface of the eye is fused with the overlying skin. So the eye, there is no opening because the anterior surface of the eye is fully fused with the overlying skin. This condition is called as cryptophthalmos. Next, about the aqueous chamber, the aqueous humor which is present in front of the lens is aqueous humor. Posterior to the lens is called vitreous chamber containing vitreous body or vitreous humor. Aqueous humor, further the anterior, this part is divided into anterior and posterior chambers by the iris, and which is containing a thin fluid, whereas the vitreous chamber contains thick denser fluid. And aqueous humor is secreted by the capillaries of the ciliary process into the posterior chamber of the eyeball, and from the posterior chamber through the pupil into the anterior chamber. That's how the aqueous humor is circulated. Next, about the lens. The lens is a transparent biconvex structure which is present behind the iris in front of the vitreous body, and it is located over a fossa which is called hyaloid fossa, and anterior surface it is less convex than the posterior surface. Lens is also completely avascular structure. It gains its nutrition from the aqueous humor. So that was about the aqueous humor. Next, about the vitreous body which present posterior to the lens. So this is the vitreous body which is traversed by an empty canal called as hyaloid canal, and vitreous body contains 90% of water, and it is colorless transparent fluid, thick fluid, little denser than aqueous humor. And hyaloid canal, I said it is traversed by hyaloid artery during fetal life which disappears and degenerates before birth, and it is called as Clockett's canal as well. And hyaloid fossa, where the lens is resting, this fossa is called as hyaloid fossa, where the posterior surface of the lens lies in it. And hyaloid membrane, the outer, this covering is called as the membrane which is surrounding the vitreous body, and no blood vessel pierces the hyaloid membrane. Let's see some more clinical aspects. Myopia, nearsightedness, means the person is able to see the near objects, he is having difficult to see the far objects. Myopia is a common eye condition which is present in all younger generation. Myopia occurs when the eyeball is slightly longer than the usual form in front to back. This causes the light rays to focus at a point in front of the retina rather than directly on the surface. You can see retina is here, the point is focused here in front of the retina, which can be corrected by spectacles or contact lenses. Then hypermyopia. Hypermyopia is called farsightedness. This vision problem occurs when the light rays entering the eye focus behind the retina rather than directly on it. So the eyeball of the far-sighted person is shorter than the normal. So we can see here is the retina, and we can see it is forming posterior to the eye. Astigmatism is the most common congenital anomaly with the oblong or oval shaped eye, and causes the light rays to focus at 2 points in the back of the eye rather than just in one area. We can see it forms at 2 points, one here and one here it is forming. And in most significant astigmatic eye, the oblong or oval shape causes the light rays to focus on 2 points. Then presbyopia, it is occurs because of aging. So the age related changes which occur within the proteins of the lens, making the lens harder and elastic with the years. That is called presbyopia. Glaucoma. Glaucoma, increase in the intraocular pressure, is called as glaucoma above the normal limits, and it damages the optic nerve, and this can result in decreased peripheral vision and eventually leads to blindness. Diabetic retinopathy, it is occurs due to because of high glucose levels, blood glucose levels, and which causes the damage to the blood vessels of retina, and they can be leak of the fluid in or bleed, and this causes the retina to swell and form deposits leading to blindness. That is called as diabetic retinopathy. So that was about the anatomy of retina. Let's see a few questions related to it. The thinnest area of the sclera. Which is the thinnest area of the sclera? The site of insertion of recti muscles will be the thinnest area of the sclera. So behind the rectus insertion is the thinnest area of sclera. Continuation of inner choroid layer is, choroid layer continues to form the, I hope you can answer, pigment layer of retina.